Welcome back to the deep dive. So today we're looking at Upstream by Dan Heath
Oh, interesting choice.
and seeing how it connects to school leadership.
I like it.
For all those assistant principals, principals, superintendents out there
Yeah,
trying to be even better leaders, get the most out of their teams, and really boost student achievement.
absolutely. That's the goal.
And that's where Upstream comes in, right?
That's where it comes in.
Luckily, we've got an expert here to break it all down for us.
Happy to be here. I think what's fascinating about Upstream is how it really pushes us to change our thinking about problems. It's not about just reacting all the time.
Right.
It's about getting ahead of them, being proactive.
That's so key, especially in the school environment.
Absolutely. It's essential for any school leader.
Okay, so let's jump right in.
Let's do it.
Early on, Heath talks about this idea of problem blindness.
Ah, yes.
He uses the example of Chicago public schools and their struggle with a high dropout rate.
Oh, right. I remember that example.
It was almost like everyone just accepted it for years, like it was just the norm.
It's like that saying, we've always done it this way. But strong school leadership means looking at those norms that aren't actually working.
Exactly.
Like the leaders at CPS, they finally said, we own this dropout problem. That's what effective leaders do. They don't just accept the status quo.
They take responsibility.
They take responsibility. They look for solutions.
So let's say you're a principal and you're dealing with something like chronic absenteeism.
Okay. Yeah.
How do you avoid falling into that problem blindness trap?
It starts with asking the right questions.
Okay.
It's not just about how many kids are missing school.
Right.
It's about why are they missing school? Talk to your students, your teachers, your families.
Let's dig deeper.
Exactly. Look for those patterns and root causes that might be hidden in plain sight.
That makes a lot of sense.
It's about being proactive, getting to the heart of the issue.
And Heath also talks about finding those leverage points for change, right?
Oh, absolutely.
He uses the example of this program in Chicago called BAM.
Yes. Bam. I love that example.
They use things like cognitive behavioral therapy and mentoring
Powerful stuff.
to help students deal with anger and impulsivity.
And the results were incredible.
Yeah, they saw a big drop in arrests for the kids involved in the program.
Really highlights the impact of targeted interventions.
But what's the takeaway for, say, a principal? Is it about trying to copy this exact program?
Not necessarily. It's
Yeah.
more about understanding the principle behind it.
Got it.
BAM worked because they focused on the specific needs of those students.
Okay.
So for school leaders, it's about figuring out what those BAM moments are in their own schools.
So, like, what are the specific things driving negative behavior or holding students back?
Exactly. What are those unique challenges your students are facing?
Then you can create your own interventions that actually address those challenges.
Precisely. Tailored to your specific context.
So it's about being a detective, in a way.
I like that analogy.
Find the clues and then craft a solution that fits.
It's about understanding the problem before you try to solve it.
But then how do you know if it's actually working?
That's a million-dollar question.
Heath also talks about measuring success effectively.
It's not always easy.
He says it's not just about the numbers that are easy to track, right?
Right. It's about going beyond the surface.
He gives that example of the sidewalk repair program in Boston.
Oh, interesting.
By just focusing on citizen complaints,
Okay.
they ended up giving way more resources to wealthier neighborhoods.
Makes you think.
Yeah, just because something's easy to measure doesn't mean it's the most important thing.
Absolutely.
So as school leaders, are we sometimes guilty of the same thing?
It's a good question to ask ourselves.
Maybe we get so focused on standardized test scores
Yeah,
that we're missing other signs of how students are really doing.
that's a real danger.
Like, are they engaged? Are they developing socially and emotionally? Do they even have access to the resources they need?
All those things matter.
It's about making sure everyone has a chance to succeed.
Equity is key.
And then Heath gets into this idea of actually changing the system itself.
That's where things get really interesting.
He talks about this initiative in California called Building Healthy Communities.
Ah, yes, I'm familiar with that.
They empower residents to advocate for change in their own neighborhoods,
A great example of grassroots organizing.
tackling things like pollution, access to healthy food, all sorts of things.
It's about giving people a voice, giving them the power to shape their own communities.
But how does that translate to running a school?
It's a big jump, for sure.
It feels like a huge leap.
But the core idea is so relevant for school leaders.
Okay, I'm intrigued.
Think about it. How can we create that same sense of ownership within our schools?
How can we empower our teachers, our staff, our students, our families?
Exactly. How can we create a culture where everyone feels like they have a stake in the success of the school?
So it's almost like creating a mini Building Healthy Communities project, but within your school.
I like that. It's about building that sense of shared responsibility and collective action.
That's a really powerful concept,
It is, and it starts with fostering a culture of collaboration.
where everyone feels heard and respected.
Absolutely. It's about building a shared vision for success and then working together to make it happen.
And Heath dives into even more in-depth examples of this upstream thinking in action.
Oh, he does.
He talks about how Iceland tackled teen substance abuse.
Such a fascinating case study.
And this team in North Carolina working to prevent domestic violence.
Really inspiring example.
I'm definitely curious to hear more about those.
Me too.
But I think we're actually running out of time for this segment.
Oh, wow. Time flies when you're having fun.
It really does.
Let's talk about Iceland then.
Okay.
What they did to combat teen substance abuse, it's really a fantastic example of upstream thinking in action. Instead of just focusing on punishing kids who were using drugs or alcohol,
Right.
they took a step back.
Yeah.
They looked at the bigger picture. They got families involved, communities, even policymakers.
Wow, a real community effort.
Exactly. They created all sorts of after-school programs, sports leagues, art clubs.
Have them something to do.
Give them something positive to focus on. Exactly.
Keep them busy.
Keep them busy, and they really emphasize strengthening parent-child bonds.
That's so important, that connection.
It is. It's crucial.
So they really threw everything but the kitchen sink at this problem.
It sounds like it, right? But I guess that's the point.
Yeah, I mean, these are complex issues.
They are. They often require multifaceted solutions.
And it sounds like it worked.
It did. They saw a huge decrease in teen substance abuse rates.
It's amazing what can happen when you really address those root causes.
Absolutely. It's about being proactive, getting ahead of the problem.
But I imagine it takes a ton of work.
It does. It's a big undertaking.
And a lot of school leaders are probably thinking, I could never pull that off.
It's true. A nationwide effort like Iceland's is on a different scale than what a single school leader can do. But the lessons are still applicable.
Okay.
The key takeaway here is collaboration.
Collaboration.
To look for opportunities to partner with community organizations, parents, local businesses.
Create that support system that extends beyond the school.
Exactly. It takes a village, right?
It really does.
And even small steps in that direction can have a big impact.
So instead of feeling like you have to do it all yourself,
Right.
you're building a coalition, a team.
Find those partners who share your vision, who can bring their own strengths to the table.
Work smarter, not harder.
Exactly. And Heath gives another really inspiring example.
Okay.
The domestic violence high-risk team in High Point, North Carolina.
Oh, I've heard of them.
They've done amazing work.
What have they done?
They've created this remarkable system for identifying and supporting women who are at the highest risk of becoming victims of domestic violence.
Wow, that's powerful.
It is, and it connects to school leadership in a really interesting way.
Okay, I'm curious. How so?
Think about it. They're not waiting for a tragedy to happen before they take action.
You're being proactive.
Exactly. They're using data
Oh, interesting.
to identify those warning signs.
So they can intervene early.
Exactly. And they bring together all these different experts,
Cuckoo.
law enforcement, social services, victim advocacy groups.
A real multidisciplinary team.
It is. It's all about proactive collaboration and using data to make informed decisions.
So how does a school leader apply that?
Well, think about it like this. You need to be proactive in identifying students who might be at risk.
At risk for what?
It could be academic struggles, behavioral issues, maybe something's going on at home.
Okay, I see.
You need to have those support systems in place
Before a crisis hit.
before a crisis hits. Exactly.
And I guess you don't have to have all the answers yourself.
You don't. Just like that team in North Carolina, you bring in the experts.
Your counselors, social workers, teachers.
Even parents can be a valuable resource.
Build that network of support.
Exactly. It's not about being a lone hero. It's about being a facilitator.
Bring people together. Empower them to make a difference.
That's the idea. It's a shift in perspective.
I like that. And that actually brings us to another point that Heath brings up.
What's that?
This idea of ghost victories.
Ah, yes. Ghost victories. A very important concept.
I've never heard of that before.
Well, Heath uses this term to describe situations where we think we're making progress,
Sure.
but really we're just kind of shifting problems around.
Or masking them with superficial solutions.
Exactly. It's like putting a Band-Aid on a broken leg.
I'm trying to picture what that would look like in a school setting.
Okay, let's say school is under pressure to reduce the number of suspensions.
Okay, yeah, that's a common one.
So they implement a policy that encourages teachers to give warnings instead of suspensions for minor offenses.
Sounds good on paper.
It does, right?
Yeah.
On paper, the suspension rates go down.
But are they really addressing the root cause of the behavior?
That's the question. Are they providing students with the support they need to make positive choices?
Or are they just sweeping the problem under the rug?
That's the danger. It's like those inflatable car dealership figures.
Uh-huh. I
They
think.
look impressive from a
But
distance.
they're just filled with air.
Exactly. So how can school leaders avoid chasing those ghost victories?
That's the key question. How do you know if you're making real progress?
It goes back to what we were talking about earlier, measuring what truly matters.
Not just the easy stuff.
Right. Go beyond those surface level metrics.
Talk to your students, your teachers, your staff.
Be observant. Look at what's happening in the classrooms, in the hallways.
Look for those subtle signs that tell you whether your efforts are actually making a difference.
It's about being honest with yourself.
Are you really solving the problem or just creating the illusion of progress?
Exactly. It takes self-awareness.
And a willingness to question your own assumptions.
Absolutely. That's crucial for any leader. It does take a certain level of honesty and being willing to look in the mirror and say, okay, are we really making a difference?
Yeah, are we actually addressing the root causes?
Exactly.
Not just like putting on a show.
Right, because that's not helping anyone in the long run.
And Heath talks about the importance of creating space for strategic thinking.
Oh, absolutely. That's crucial.
But I think a lot of school leaders are probably listening and thinking, I don't have time for that. I'm barely keeping up with everything as it is.
I understand that feeling, believe me.
Yeah.
But Heath makes this really interesting point. He says it's precisely when you feel the most overwhelmed that you need to step back and think strategically.
It seems counterintuitive.
It does, but it's about finding those little pockets of time, even just a few minutes here and there,
Okay.
to reflect, to ask yourself those bigger questions, to get input from your team.
So maybe it's not about blocking off hours for these big planning retreats,
Right.
but finding those small moments throughout the day to just pause and reflect.
Exactly. Like, am I moving in the right direction? Are we focusing on the right things?
Is this actually working?
Exactly. Those are the questions we need to be asking ourselves constantly.
And it's about empowering your team to do the same.
Absolutely. Create a culture where people feel comfortable speaking up, sharing their ideas, challenging the status quo.
That's so important, that open communication.
It is. It's about fostering a sense of shared ownership.
But then how do you balance that with, the need to be decisive? Because at the end of the day, school leaders have to make tough calls.
That's a great point, and Heath acknowledges that tension.
Mm-hmm.
He talks about the need to be both deliberate and adaptable.
Okay.
Encourages school leaders to experiment, try new things, be willing to change course based on what you learn.
So it's about finding that sweet spot, right, between having a clear vision and being open to feedback.
Exactly. You have to be willing to adjust your approach as needed.
And he gives a good example of this with the campaign to reduce plastic bag usage.
Oh, right. That's a great example.
It took multiple attempts, setbacks, adjustments,
It was a long process.
before they finally found a solution that worked.
And that's often how systems change happens. It's rarely a straight line.
Yeah, it's messy, it's iterative.
And you have to be comfortable with a certain level of ambiguity.
You can't expect to have all the answers right away.
Right. You have to be willing to learn as you go.
And sometimes even well-intentioned interventions can have unintended consequences.
That's right. And Heath uses a really interesting example to illustrate this point.
What's that?
The Cobra effect.
The Cobra effect. Okay, I've never heard of that before.
It's a fascinating story from India during British colonial rule.
Okay,
The government wanted to reduce the cobra population.
makes sense. Cobras are dangerous.
Right. So they offered a reward for every dead cobra that people brought in.
Okay,
Seems like a logical solution, right?
yeah, I guess so.
But here's what happened. People started breeding cobras just to collect the reward.
Oh, wow, they gamed the system.
They did. And when the government realized what was going on, they scrapped the program.
But then what happened?
Well, the cobra breeders had all these cobras they couldn't get rid of.
Oh,
So they just released them back into the wild, making the problem even worse.
wow, so the solution actually backfired.
It did, in a spectacular way.
So what's the lesson there? For school leaders, I mean.
It's a reminder to think carefully about those potential unintended consequences.
Yeah, don't just jump into a solution without considering the possible downsides.
And be prepared to change course if things aren't going as planned.
Be flexible, be adaptable.
Exactly. Don't be afraid to admit when something isn't working.
So Upstream is really all about shifting our mindset, isn't it?
It is. It's about moving from a reactive to a proactive approach.
From putting out fires to preventing them in the first place.
Exactly. It's about changing the odds, not just reacting to what's already happened.
And Heath uses that analogy of a casino, right?
He does. He says the house always has a slight edge, but that doesn't mean you can't win.
Okay.
Similarly, by understanding the system, by making strategic interventions,
We can increase our chances of success.
we can tilt the playing field in our favor.
So it's not about controlling every variable.
Right.
It's about understanding the game and making smart bets.
Exactly. It's about being strategic, about using data and research to inform your decisions.
And he gives some great examples of this, like the work being done by the crime lab in Chicago,
Oh, yes, they're doing fantastic work.
using data to figure out what's driving crime and then developing targeted interventions.
It's about moving beyond those Band-Aid solutions and getting to the root of the problem.
It's about being thoughtful and intentional.
And ultimately, it's about creating a better future for everyone.
Upstream is packed with these thought-provoking insights and inspiring examples.
It's a book that really makes you think differently about leadership and problem solving.
It's a call to action for all of us who are working to make a difference in the world.
And a reminder that we all have the power to create positive change.
So as we wrap up our deep dive into Upstream,
Yes.
we want to leave you with a few key takeaways.
And one final provocative question.
So for our school leader listeners out there, where should they start? What are those key takeaways?
Well, first of all, you don't need permission to start thinking upstream.
You can start today, right now.
Exactly. Start in your own school, in your own community.
Identify those problems that you really care about.
What are those issues that keep you up at night?
What are those challenges that you see your students facing every day?
And once you've identified those problems, look for those leverage points.
Where can you make the biggest impact?
What are those upstream interventions that can prevent those problems from happening in the first place?
And that might be different for every school leader, right?
Absolutely. There's no one-size-fits-all solution.
It's about finding what works for you, for your school, for your community.
Exactly. The key is to be proactive, to be thoughtful, to be intentional.
I think so many of us get stuck in that cycle of just reacting to problems,
We're constantly putting out fires.
dealing with the urgent stuff.
But upstream challenges us to step back and say, okay, what can we do to prevent these fires from starting in the first place?
And that might start with something as simple as having a conversation.
It could. Talk to your teachers, your staff, your students, your parents.
Get their perspectives, their insights.
Ask them, what are you seeing? What are your concerns? What ideas do you have?
Tap into that collective wisdom.
Exactly. You might be surprised by what you learn.
So it's not about having all the answers yourself.
Right. It's about being open to new ideas, new perspectives.
It's about creating that space for collaborative problem solving
And it's about being willing to experiment, to try new things, to see what works.
and to adjust your approach as needed.
Don't be afraid to change course if something's not working.
Embrace that growth mindset.
Absolutely. We're all learning and growing all the time.
And even small steps can make a big difference.
They can. It's about that consistent, persistent effort over time.
And that brings us to that final provocative question that Heath leaves us with.
Okay, what's that?
Remember that paradox of prevention we talked about?
The fact that it's hard to get credit for something that doesn't happen.
It's like, how do you measure the success of a program that prevents school violence if there's no violence to measure?
Right. It's a challenge.
So Heath asks, how can you, as a school leader, make a compelling case for investing in those upstream initiatives?
How can you convince people to support those efforts even though the results might not be immediately visible?
That's a great question, and it's something we hope all of you listening will really think about.
How can you shift the culture in your school to one that values and prioritizes prevention?
How can you make the case for those investments that might not have immediate payoffs, but can have a huge impact in the long run?
Those are the big questions, the important questions.
And we hope this deep dive has given you some food for thought, some ideas to take back to your schools.
We encourage you to keep the conversation going, share your thoughts with us on social media, tell us what resonated with you.
We're always eager to hear from our listeners and to keep learning and growing together.
So until next time, keep diving deep, keep swimming upstream.
Because that's where the real change happens.